Okay, so we can now analyze more in detail how we can manage procurement using SAP ERP, so which are the main activities and processes that are supported. Here you can see the processes that are mainly supported by SAP. In particular, the trigger of the procurement process are fulfillment, so a request for from a customer if you're buying like finished product or like accessories, or production, or an internal requisition coming from an internal user that lead to a requisition from the user, and then of course the process breakdown if we already have a supplier that is able to provide this good, and in case we just transform this purchase request on a purchase order, and then we receive the goods, and then we pay the supplier after invoice verification. While instead, if the source of supply is not known, so we need to find a new supplier, we have to pass through request for quotation, request for proposal, vendor selection, evaluation, and contract management, as you have seen in your case. These cover what we call like the so-called sourcing activities, while instead the part covered the so-called supply activities. As some of you have done with me supply chain management 460, should know that the sourcing support with SAP is covered in that course. So in this course we will just deal with the supply part, so the operational cycle. Of course, in doing that, the procurement populate master data and use master data, and populate and use transaction data, which are that connected to accounting, management, and financial, material document, and transaction document. So we are actually going to analyze the case where we have a requisition. So we have a requisition coming from an internal user. We need to transform it into a purchase order, and then a purchase order is delivered to a supplier that prepare the goods and the service and whatever we want to be delivered. We received what is coming from a supplier, we verify it's compliant, and then once the compliant has been verified, we can receive the supplier invoice and pay the vendor. Let's start with the requisition. So the internal user need to put a purchase requisition, which comes from other process. Of course, we already discussed that in class. This can be done also manually, so not in the system. That's why SAP allow the possibility to create an order or a quotation or whatever, not referencing a requisition. For the purpose of this course, we will make the hypothesis that everything was managed through the system. But of course, like, the user should input the date when she puts the requisition, the date when she wants the material, when he wants the material, the quantity, if there are some preferred vendor, purchasing info record, and of course the client, the company code, the purchasing group that this requisition refer to. And of course, as an output, we will create a purchase requisition that can lead to a purchase order or a request for quotation. Again, to realize a purchase requisition, there are different type of data that are needed. In particular, the most important part are the user input data, because these are all the information like item category, account assignment, material number, quantity, dates, receiving plant, that the user specify because it's the user issuing the request. And of course, for accounting purposes, the important is also the organizational data, so where this request comes from. Of course, then there are some other optional or very important data like vendor reference, the purchasing for record if associated to a vendor, and of course material master data of the category that the user is requesting. What can happen when a purchase requisition is issued by a user? Again, this will be our case. So when the supply source is known, so we already have a supplier that is able to provide what is requested, the purchase requisition is immediately transformed in a purchase order. How? There is a source list in SAP that can assign automatically the requisition to the supplier that is in charge, that is assigned through the purchasing info record to that category, and for which we have a contract in place with predefined condition at a certain price or whatever. If there are, of course, more than one vendor, it's up to the user to identify a preferred one, or it's up to the purchasing department to understand to which one to assign this requisition and to refer the purchase order. The second case, which we won't see in this course, again, this is the part of the sourcing and it's part of supply chain management for 60, is when we don't have a vendor and a contract which are already active, so the purchase requisition need to be transformed in a request for quotation, which then leads to different quotation, which then leads to a contract, and the contract then it's referenced to a sorry for messing this up, but a contract here is then referred to a specific purchase order. Again, and we already talked about the fact that this process usually is managed very informally when the purchase requisition is not linked actually to a quotation. It's a more difficult and more complex process to be managed, but again, we won't see this case. We will only see the case where the requisition is immediately transformed in a purchase order, because again, this second scenario is included in supply chain management for 60. So let's see how to create a purchase requisition. We will use some screenshot taken from SAP using a particular case. That's our scenario. So GBI, this is our case as usual. We need to buy some accessories. So a shirt, SHRT 1000. We need to buy 5,000 t-shirt, which is so remember, just to make you a refresh of what you cover in probably supply chain management. So when the inventory is low, so reach 50 unit, you need to reorder. That's the reorder point, okay? Reorder point for shirt. And whenever you need to reorder, so it's time to reorder, and whenever you reorder 500, and this is probably the economic order quantity of shirt. How much the supplier priced the shirt? $15 per shirt. So that's the scenario. So let's create the it's displaying. So reorder point it's 50, and your quantities is 500. The requisition is please deliver at the Miami plant 500 shirt because we are short. So imagine you are the user, and the user create this type of requisition. That's the transaction that you use. So the purchasing transaction are very popular. So a lot of people know the name of the transaction for vendor payment, for create a purchase order, for verify good receipt. So keep that in mind, because it's likely that you are using them very often. In this case, the transaction is ME51N, creation of a purchase requisition. If you create a purchase requisition, of course, that's the screenshot. So you need to include the name of the material, a short text describing the quantity, the unit of measure, when you want the delivery date, which is the material group, when you want this to be delivered, and which is the purchasing group that this requisition belongs to. In particular, remember that especially when the supplier source is known, you have already established some condition with the supplier about the replenishment lead time, and SAP knows that, but it doesn't, let's say, calculate it or let's say alert you automatically, but it tells you that please, there is already a supply source known, condition have been established, here you are specifying a delivery date, user please verify that the delivery date can be met. Usually the user never does that, so it's up to the purchasing department, but again, SAP tells you that you need to verify that the delivery date that you are requesting is reasonable. Then of course you can navigate through the different tab, again something that the user usually never does, to populate the requisition with different information. Again, why am I showing you that? Because if the user doesn't do that, then you have to reaccess the requisition and complete it so that they can be linked correctly to the next document. In particular, again, need to be sure that you populate the material data with all the characteristics. Then you have quantities and dates where you specify exactly what do you want and where and for which reason. The valuation, the source of supply, if you want to specify which type of vendor if you have a preferred vendor that you want to be selected, the status of the requisition, the contact person, so the person that creates the requisition. So all of this tab should be populated. Once you have done, of course, you save your requisition, and a new number would be assigned to the requisition and will be then referred through the whole procurement process. After the requisition has been created, it's up to the purchasing department to create the purchase order associated to this requisition. Again, remember, the requisition can be created, the purchase order can be created manually or automatically. Automatically, if the requisition has been filled correctly. Manually, if the requisition is not good, so the purchasing department actually close it and create a purchase order from scratch. And again, can be with or without reference to other documents. Again, we are not seeing this part, but of course a purchase order can refer a requisition, another purchase order, if we are, for example, correcting a previous one, or refers a request for quotation or quotation in case the supply source are not known. And of course, you need to have different master data to create a purchase order, like the material master, the vendor for the condition, the info record for the pricing, and the condition of supply. And here you see in particular the different data that populate the purchase order. Transaction document, if you are referring a requisition, an RFQ, or a quotation. Master data, material, vendor, condition, contract, existing contract and agreement, purchasing info record. And of course, there is also an activity from the user that need, of course, to check that all the data are consistent and correct. Please pay attention that the situation can be very different. So we can be in the very easy case when one requisition leads to one purchase order. We can have more requisition that leads to one purchase order as well. Like if someone needs a conveyor system for a project, and then there is another user or another project that needs a conveyor system with the same characteristic, of course the purchasing department may issue the same purchase order if the supplier is the same. So more requisition if they refer the same category, and this can apply to everything. I need a laptop and my colleague needs a laptop as well. We both need an Apple. Of course, the purchasing department creates just one purchase order with two Apple laptop. Okay, that can be of different characteristics, but still one purchase order, and instead of creating two different documents. And of course, then that can be the case where more requisition can lead to more purchase order if what is requested is different, or if the supplier requested is different and the request is legit. We already stressed the fact that a document in SAP has an header and has line items. An header include the document dates, the vendor, the currency, the terms. We already see like how a purchase order look like, but just remember that header like main characteristic of the document, while instead the line items specify what you are requesting, so the material number, the description, the quantity, the price, the delivery date. So there are different tabs that you can populate. And remember that a purchase order is an obligation of acquisition. So when you issue a purchase order to your supplier, of course, this means that you are obliged to populate, to buy that goods or service from the supplier. Remember that the fact that you are obliged to purchase is a cost. It doesn't mean necessarily that there is a financial flow associated to this purchase order. Again, there are payment terms that are established with the supplier, and the actual cash out can happen on a different point of time when you issue a purchase order. So, purchase order is a process obligation of acquisition. So remember, this means economic flow, cost. No financial flow. I mean, it cannot say that is also a financial flow. It doesn't lead necessarily to a cash out. Now let's see how a purchase order looks like. Again, we will see again, but like that's exactly what I was telling you. So this is the header where you have a standard purchase order, the type of vendor, the document date, the different tab where you specify the characteristic of the purchase order with the different description, and then you have the line item where each line item, in this case we just have one, okay, which are Rogling for Vela, which I honestly don't know what is that, but they specify which type of material is that, the quantities, the delivery schedule, and if it was like another line item, you would change this view and you are seeing characteristic for each of the material that is requested and included in the purchase order. How can you communicate with vendors that a purchase order has been generated from the system? So, with the plant, of course, with an internal plant, if it is an internal procurement, usually is easy because you are using the same system. So basically, a transfer order is automatically created, and the plant see the fact that you are asking the production to produce something for an internal user. It's more tricky when you need to communicate this with the vendor, because again, as far as the system of the buyer and the vendor are not integrated, communication, automatic communication can be tough. So usually what happens is that if the system are integrated, so if you are using the same SAP system which have an open channel, you can use EDI, electronic data interchange, so the purchase order from the customer can be transformed immediately in a sales order for the vendor, but this is not super common. What is usually happen is that you use fax and print. These are quite like old-fashioned, but like you use email or you use phone or you use something like more unstructured, because the system are usually not integrated, and then the salespeople on the supplier side need to verify that what you are requesting is compliant to the condition that have been agreed between the two. Let's take back our example. So we have been requested to purchase a 500 shirt from Spy Gear to be delivered in Miami. We have a purchase requisition, and so now procurement need to issue a purchase order of $7,500 to Spy Gear, which is the selected vendor, to be delivered to the Miami plant for the user that created the request. This is the transaction ME21N, which is creation of a purchase order when the vendor or the supplying plant is known, so there is already an active contract in place. Otherwise, you see that there is ME25 when the vendor is unknown, so you don't have that the vendor is new, so it need to be included from scratch. That's what you see. So remember that if the requisition has been created and it was structured, you can link to the purchase order to the requisition, so some fields are automatically populated. So to do that, you need to select the variant icon, select, and SAP is telling you, okay, when you say the variant icons, SAP is telling you, okay, you want to link this standard purchase order to some previous document. Which one? Another purchase order, a request for quotation, a contract, scheduling agreements. On my purchase order, we want a requisition. And if we select purchase requisition, SAP show the most the most frequent document created. In our case, we just create one, so it's the first one displayed. So if I click this, okay, so if I click this, you see that the requisition is referenced and the purchase order is already populated with the information coming from the requisition. In particular, what is not taken from the requisition, you see when you click here, what is not taken from the requisition is the purchasing organization, because again, the requisition is something that is included from the user. So the user, like SAP, know that the user can be precise or not. So what usually happens is that as when a purchase order is created, is an obligation of acquisition and the economic flow is automatically generated, SAP want to be sure that this cost need to be associated and need to be charged to this purchasing organization. So you have to be sure SAP asks you to re-enter the purchase organization, and you can see here from the error message that is displaying on the bottom. So you enter the purchasing organization, and once you have done that, you see here, you have to include again the name of the vendor, because again the requisition can suggest you which vendor you want to use or whatever, or selecting from the source list. But again, the purchase order, being an acquisition, an obligation to acquire something, want to be sure that you are selecting the correct vendor. So, same as the purchase organization, you have to reselect the vendor that you want to issue this purchase order. When you have done that, the purchase order is created, and you can just save the purchase order, and the number of the document will be assigned here in the status. You can see that you can check what you did, order 500, 7,500, and still to be delivered 500 units for a total of $7,500. So we have created the purchase order. If you now display the previous created purchase requisition, so if you try to get back to the purchase requisition that you have created before, as you can see is that now if you go on the status bar of the purchase requisition, you see that this requisition has been updated because the procurement status is, the processing status is a purchase order created from procurement. For what? 500 unit, and this is the purchase order. So if you are the user and you want to see which is the status of your request, you can go back and open your requisition, and you can see that, oh yeah, like the procurement is managing my request, the request is through the system, and actually which is the status, the purchase order has been created, and so the vendor is probably taking care of that. The next step is that, okay, the vendor is taking care of my request, and so at a certain point it will send me the goods or the service that I requested. So remember, we are talking about goods because they are tangible, but if this will be service, like it will be the same. So whenever you receive the goods or the service that you have requested, you need to create the so-called goods received document, which include some data like the purchase order and then the delivery document. So this process include the purchase order that need to be referenced and the delivery document or the picking list which is created, master data because it updates and it refers the material and the vendor and the stock that is involved in this process, which are the tasks you need to verify the material that you have received and create the good received document that is referring to this delivery. And what happens is that if everything is correct, you generate a new material document because you have received a service or material, and there is also a financial impact because you are updating. For example, if you are receiving raw materials, you are updating the status of your stock, which is an asset, which means that you are impacting some of your cost and asset items. We chart the data that are used to the good receipt step. So of course you need the purchase order to be referenced. Okay, so everything that is related to the purchase order. You need of course to create the delivery document because of course when goods are delivered, and we will see this in the warehouse management part, you need also to create a delivery document that refers the purchase order number and record the material delivered and the quantity delivered. And then, of course, there are also some user activities that need to be done, which are verify that everything is correct, if something needs to be changed. So there are some user input that need to be provided in order to conclude the good receipt process. When again you manage the good receipt activities, what you create is the so-called delivery document, which of course need to be aligned with the purchase order in terms of quantity and what has been delivered. Remember that one purchase order can lead to multiple deliveries, and of course the sum of the delivery, and so multiple delivery document, and the sum of multiple deliveries and multiple delivery document need to be aligned with the purchase order, or vice versa. Multiple purchase order can be consolidated in one delivery in that case, so of course the delivery document need to refer more than one purchase order. Remember that whenever you received the quantity that were included into the delivery, SAP has three different ways to classify stock. So whenever you received tangible items, you need to be sure to classify them in an appropriate way. So unrestricted use is basically what we saw in supply chain management called cycle stock, so stock that can be used for production or whichever is the need for the company. In quality inspection is stock that instead cannot be used, inventory that cannot be used because it's still under quality inspection, so we still don't know if it is compliant to what we requested. Block stock is stock that cannot be used, which can be for two reasons. One is a stock that was not compliant and is waiting to be, like, for example, returned to the supplier, or is safety stock. So it's stock that is there only to cope with certain circumstances, variability of or uncertainty of demand, of lead time, or whatever. So to use this stock, you can only have specific authorization. So to use safety stock or block stock in SAP, you can take safety stock, block stock, or return stock only if you have an authorization code. So you have to classify whenever you receive material stock in one of these categories. Which is the financial impact of good receipt? So if you purchase a 500 t-shirt and you actually receive it, so for $7,500, of course, your inventory is debited of $7,500, and your invoice receipt, so your good receipt, which is your accounts payable to the vendor, is credited of $7,500, because you need to record the fact that you have received goods that you haven't paid yet to your vendor. And of course this is the general ledger, the sub-ledger account, which is linked to the vendor, which will then be managed through the reconciliation account, as we saw in the accounting module. In fact, whenever you execute good receipt, there are two types of documents that are generated. One is the material document, which is this one. So you update the fact that you have received materials and your stock as like the quantity of stock of inventory has been increased, or have remained the same because maybe the material is not compliant, but in some way you have impacted the inventory, so you generate material document. In this case, again, it means that you have received this material for this quantity in this plant, so you record a material movement, But this translates also in an accounting document, in the meaning that you have created inventory and you have impacted also the accounts payable account for the same amount, because you are not paying immediately, but you are going to pay in the future according to the payment terms you have established with the supplier. Of course, this leads to a purchase order update, in the meaning that once the delivery documents have been received, of course the delivery document has been linked to the purchase order, so vice versa, the purchase order has been linked to the delivery document. Let's get back to our example. So let's try to record the receiving goods against the purchase order. Again, that's a very popular transaction, MIGO, MIGO, purchase order number known. Here you see the path. So you open a good receipt purchase order created by this Kevin Coleman guy, and this, as you can see here, this displays the good receipt screen. Again, the first thing you have to do, and SAP is telling you, as you are referencing a purchase order number, the first thing you have to do is to link the delivery document to a purchase order. In particular, when you look for that, you see here, you need to look that in the tab. When you look for that, the system copies the purchase order information into the good receipt. So they know that. You have ordered t-shirt for 500 quantity, and now you have to record what happened once the goods have been delivered. In particular, in our case, the hypothesis is that you received exactly what we have requested. So what you have to do is checking, you see this tick OK button, which means that yes, we ordered 500 to this location, and they were received in this location exactly in this quantity, and they were all compliant. How can we say that it was all compliant? Because you see here that the stock type has been classified as unrestricted, so everyone can use that. And in particular, then you can include some more details about what you have received by opening the detail data button that you see here. In particular, when you open the detail data button, you can write some more aspects related to the delivery. So, for example, if you make a quality check, who manage it, so you can include some more detail about the delivery document. Once everything has been checked, so see here, so the detail has been included, what you received is what you requested, everything seems okay, you can save the goods receipt, and the goods receipt will be created. Now, as we did for the purchase order, if you now display the previously created requisition, you can see that the status is not only that the purchase order has been created, but as you can see here, is that the good receipt has also been posted for the same quantity again. So if you are the user, you open that screen and you can see that yeah, like my goods were received, and the quantity I requested is now present in my stock. In particular, if you open the status tab here, you can see exactly what happened, because there's a summary. You ordered 500 and the total price was 7,500, and you received, so they were delivered exactly 500 units for a total of $7,500. So this gives you, from a user perspective, confirmation that the procurement process for now on has been managed in an appropriate way. Then, okay, we have received the goods, we have recorded transaction, our user is satisfied. So actually, from a supply chain management perspective, like the process is over, okay? Then everything that you request has been received. Now the accounting part starts, where you have to receive the verified invoice and then pay the vendor. The first step is that I have received an invoice, I have to verify that the invoice is correct. In particular, this process is called the three-way match, because the invoice is verified if it is aligned with the delivery document, so the good receipt, and the purchase order. Okay, so remember, the purchase requisition doesn't count. So when you have to pay the supplier, accounting will verify, will check only if there is an alignment with the purchase order and the delivery document. Which are the data that you need for invoice verification? Of course, all the documents that were included in the purchase order, all the data that were included in the purchase order, the material document, of course, and the delivery document, which are connected to the good receipt, and of course, all the data that you need to create or to like report the paper invoice, electronic invoice into the system, the vendor number, the date, the quantity, the amount, and of course then you need also some user support to verify that everything is correct. Again, this is done by procurement, but it's an accounting aspect. Okay, what's happening is that you need to verify the invoice. You have received the invoice for purchased 500 t-shirt, $7,500, which means that from a financial perspective, you are going to, in the first step, you have credited the account payable in spite of an increase in debit of an asset. Now, when you receive the invoice, what's happening is that you are going to debit, you are going to decrease the account payable of the same amount. The vendor account will be credited of $7,500 because these are vendor expenses. And of course, this will increase the accounts payable because it's in process of being paid. So this will step from the let's say sub-ledger account of the vendor to the accounts payable account in the general ledger. Transaction associated is MIRO, which is another very popular transaction. You are verifying that the invoice that you are paying to your supplier is correct. Again, this is an accounting activities, but it's still made by purchasing. Okay, so you are saying that I have a debit with the supplier wants to be actually paid, so I need to verify that everything is correct, so this debit is legit. You open the transaction, and this is the enter incoming invoice screen, and again, of course, you have to refer the purchase order, you see here. And when you refer the purchase order, the system copies the data from the purchase order, and you need to verify that these data are aligned with the one that are received in the actual invoice. So remember, the supplier sending an invoice which can be like by email, by paper. So the system assumes that the invoice match the purchase order, but then you have to verify. To verify that, you need to check again the box that tells you yes, what is written in the invoice is the same that was written in the purchase order. And once you have done that, you can step toward the amount to be paid to the supplier. So if you can see here, the balance is so you need to pay to the supplier $7,500, and you need to include in the invoice an amount to be paid to the supplier. If we include the full amount here, so $7,500, once everything has been checked, of course, we will see that the balance will be zero. So we will pay to the supplier the full amount that was due. When this is verified and this is correct, we just save the invoice, and the invoice will be generated to be paid by accounting. Pay attention that from now on, like if you are sure that everything was consistent and everything was checked, like the payment will be made. So that's a very critical step, because now you are telling your accounting department that they can pay the vendor for the full amount. You check that everything was aligned. So from now on, your accounting department will take your input and pay the vendor. If you now display the previously created requisition, you see that on top of the purchase order and the goods receipt, there is also the invoice receipt. You see that 500 unit, 500 unit, 500 unit. And in fact, if you then open the status tab, you have order 500 units, 7,500, deliver 500 units, 7,500, and invoiced for now 5,000, 7,500. So you are telling your accounting department everything was aligned, three-way match, we can pay the vendor. Last process, I won't spend too much because it will be like unlikely that you will manage this type of process, which is the payment processing, which is made by accounting. So you take the three-way match and the payment method to your supplier. So you see invoice, vendor number, date amount, which already include the reference to the purchase order, the good receipt, and of course the purchase requisition if it is not important. They need to take the vendor master where it is defined, the payment terms, method and addressed, and the input, of course, they will need to like verify data. And we can now pay the vendor for how much? 500 units, $15 per t-shirt, so $7,500, which is the financial impact. The inventory will remain the same, so we have a credit here, which will be decreased when we post actually that the payment is due, as we saw before. This increase the vendor account payable account, which is then posted on the general ledger accounts payable account. And now, when we are going to pay actually the vendor, we are decreasing our bank account of this amount, and we are decreasing the vendor account on this debit, and finally, we are decreasing the accounts payable account in the general ledger when we reconcile this type of account. How can we do that in SAP? Again, the transaction is no more under purchasing, but is under accounting, post-payment F53. What we have to do is post-payment is done to the document post-outgoing payment either data. Again, I'm not going through that, but you have to populate a lot of things, which makes sense because this is the only step that account makes. So they need to spend a bunch of time in like populating different aspects that are referring to the payment posting. In particular, this is the account of the bank account from which you have to subtract the money. You have to post the type of transaction, the bank data, the supplier account, the amount that you want to be paid. So you have to populate a bunch of aspects. Once you've done that, you can exactly see what's happening. So you are posting the payment, so you are paying exactly this amount. And again, we already said that you need to assign the full quantity if you are paying the supplier in full. Instead, remember that if, for example, you would pay the supplier in 3 times, you will do that 3 times every, for example, 3 months, and every time you would assign a quantity that need to be paid, and the not assigned will be progressively decreased. Once you've done that, the posting has been made, so you have assigned everything to this payment, because we are supposing that we are paying the vendor in full. You can save the documents, and the supplier will be paid at the date that you have indicated in the post-payment document. Last thing that I want to analyze with you is that for procurement you can do some reporting through SAP. So your standard reporting tool and, let's say, transactional, which are called transactional reporting tool, or you can also use some more advanced reporting aspect. In particular, you can do basically 2 things in transactional reporting. You can extract an online list of invoice, purchase requisition, purchase order, whatever you generate through the system in the different processes, or you can generate work list, which is the list of pending works in process steps. I can show you 2 examples of online list and working list. Here you see an online list of invoices. So this is the transaction that you use, MIR5, display list of invoice and document. You have to select the criteria. So I want all the invoices in 2010 that belongs to the company code US00, and the system will display all the invoices that have been created in this period. Then you can click on each of that and see the characteristics. Very easy. You recover the list of the invoice. Online list of invoices. Same, you can do the same for purchase order, you can do the same for requisition, you can do the same for good receipt. Instead, work list extract the list of open document. In this case, you want to extract the list of open purchase requisition. Here is MIR 5, and you can see here these are all the list of open requisition that need to have a source of apply assigned to them. So basically it's showing them there is a requisition, but the procurement has not assigned a source of supply, which means or because a supplier is not present or because we haven't done it yet. So here is telling you that if you open it, these are open requisition that cannot be closed yet because some data, some clear data are missing, and so we cannot step into purchase order and then good receipt and whatever because we are missing some important data. For what concerns instead some more dynamic analysis, we can aggregate and disaggregate data recording in SAP, even if you are not using a business intelligence software. So even with SAP, we can do some type of reporting. In particular, imagine that we want to analyze some data about a purchasing group. In particular, you have to open the purchasing information system tab, and here you can make some more detailed analysis about purchasing group, vendor, material group, material service, vendor evaluation. So there are different type of aspects that you can look at. Imagine that we want to extract some data about the purchasing group. You open it, and again, sorry, it's very tiny, but basically you are searching for the purchasing group N00 in this period from between June and July of 2010, and the system is telling you, oh, you know what, that North America Purchasing Organization have had a purchase order value of 185,000 USD and an invoice amount. So of this purchase order value, invoiced 1/3, $60,000. Then if you click on if you drill down on, for example, the purchase order value for North America, so if you click here, you can see also the vendor that have determined this amount. So $7,000 for Olympic protective gear. Olympic protective gear, again, another 41,000, space by composition 96,000, and whatever. And you can see how much they've been generated and how much have been paid. If you are interested in drilling down even more, you can then select, in this case, for example, Olympic protected gear, so this one, and you can see that this Olympic protective gear 41,000 was generated in 2010 in July, and the purchase order value is 41,000 and the invoice amount was 55,100, and again there is a disalignment, so we don't know that, but maybe it is worth to explore it more in detail. But again, you can drill down and aggregate and disaggregate data in a more, like, in a smarter way than the simply like display of you see invoice or purchase order list that doesn't tell you nothing in terms of aggregated values.